Hello. Thank you for joining me once again. I am reading The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. We are on chapter 12, The Paths. Thank you for those who have been following along and listening. And I encourage everyone to get this book just for the purpose of their own. If you're not able to get the book, that is reasons why I am reading it for you to listen to. Listen, re-listen, share the good news. But until then, enjoy chapter 12. Here we go. The Paths. One morning, I woke up and began writing down my dreams in my log as usual. But my dreams lingered. I was still in that in between sleep and awake. I had dreamt about and was remembering all the various cultures and people I had witnessed on my way to the monastery. They were all so different, and everyone was so locked into the habit patterns and beliefs of their particular life within their particular culture. Some perhaps were learning, changing, and growing. Others weren't going anywhere but in circles. As I climbed out of my womb, I noticed a note stuck under my mat. It was a reading list from Zayn. Now, all of this is in that italic again. And so this is all original script. Okay? Created we the path upon our separation from the infinite one. The way out is the way back. One way back, walk must we in our own excrement. Created we all obstacles. All must be met as we follow the road home. The path is. To return to the one is death to the separate self. A great fight it will wage, great pain it will inflict. Only those who have learned the greater pain lies in separation from the one will choose the spiritual path. Many paths there are, all spiritual paths lead to the one. As closer you return, recognize you will your true self, your true family. Recognize you will the face of a stranger. Judge not the path of another. Learn to understand that you may not understand the path of another. Judge the path of another only to judge and determine your own path. Never condemn another. Condemn only actions. The path takes us through walls of fire burning us away, sharp teeth ripping away our flesh. Why then am I not harmed? The path is beset with traps. The wind flowers draw us with their sweet perfume. Thorns prick at our feet. Mud drags us down. Above and below, rocks loosen and fall. Walk in the footsteps of those who have found the way before you. The ease or difficulty one experiences while walking the path to oneness is directly determined by the degree of their humility and unselfish love. Pain and pleasure are swings pain and pleasure are swings in the arc of a pendulum. To the degree the pendulum swings into pleasure, it will swing in the same degree of pain. Many paths present themselves that lead to pleasure. With free will, we choose not pleasure, and you will create not pain. Chase not pleasure, and pain will chase you not. Accept little pleasures that come to you. Endure the pain that may come to you with long-suffering patience. Hear me, O man. Turn from the darkness of night. Turn towards the love of light. Know that your mind leads your direction. Turn from the thoughts that lead you astray. Turn to the thoughts of giving and light. They lead you to oneness, not darkness of night. Find not the great path in power and glory. Find it, you will, in the dust at your feet. With head bow in regret and humility. Beg you must with all heart. Ask then the universal one to guide you. With heart that is ready to serve all it shows. Pray that your will be that of the one. Pray the one send to you one who is one to show you the light and illuminate your soul. Seek God first, and all else will come to you. As you walk your path, let us always be your prayer to the Universal Spirit. Your will be done, not mine, in me and through me. That's the rest of all that. I left the library and was walking down the path to a hot pool. As I looked down at my feet on the path, it struck me. I was walking on my path, my spiritual path. I had finally found it, and I was really walking on it. I had a moment of elation, realization, and then a strikingly powerful kundalini rush of energy, a spiritual evolutionary force that actually changes aspects of your physical and spiritual body as you evolve. It's explained more later in the book for those of you who aren't familiar with it. When I recovered, I decided I should go down to the hot pool to get a sweat, since such a kundalini experience often triggers physical eliminations of toxins as it purifies your body. The hot pool would help me release at least some of them in a more pleasant and easier manner. Besides, I wanted to contemplate all that I had read more. And also I wanted to contemplate and examine my dreams and thoughts of the morning. Already in the pool, I found, not to my surprise, none other than my personal true teacher, Lain. Ah, you have been kissed by God again. Yes, he said, referring to the kundalini experience. More like a raped and beaten up. No, I'm sorry, I shouldn't joke about it that way. It was a wonderful blessing, a heavenly experience. Even though painful at times, yes, I have been kissed. Very good, very good. I slipped into the pool, which seemed hotter than usual to my sensitized body. Father, why are there so many different cultures and ways of living? And why are some people really seeking God and others just pretending? And others openly disinterested? Way too much of a question for a simple answer. And I was just dealing with my own contemplations this morning as I enjoyed the properties of the water. I'm sorry to disturb you. No problem, son. I was about to get out anyway. You have already learned many of the reasons behind the separations. So I think what you really question in your mind is mainly about people's paths and varying cultures, is it not? Yes, in part at least. Anyway, we are. Anywhere our journey through life takes us is our path. In that sense, everyone is on their path. But not everyone is on what we might call a spiritual path. A spiritual path is when the direction of our path is one that can finally lead us to the direction of spirit rather than materially lead us to unselfish love rather than selfishness, lead us to universal consciousness rather than separate consciousness. Our path often takes us to the school of hard knocks. So only when people are on their spiritual path are they learning. They are always being given the opportunity to learn regardless of the type of path. Karma is constantly being created, and life keeps trying to teach us something by providing us with our own self-created lessons. That explodes in our faces. Getting taught in that way has been called the school of hard knocks. But while everyone suffers with slings and arrows of life experiences, most people ignore these lessons which are being constantly presented to them. This is unfortunate when it is ignored because suffering can cause us to be introspective and really take a hard look, a deep look at the whys of our life experiences. After we've had enough suffering to open our eyes, we realize we need to change. Therein lies the value of the pain. As you've already learned, transcending our separate self and renouncing selfishness is painful too. It's like crucifying yourself. Most people won't choose the spiritual path until they realize that the pain caused as a result of living selfishly outweighs the pain of the spiritual path. But as I said, from time to time, people get hit with an unpleasant life experience, suffer, and get introspective. That's when they can more easily realize that it is worth it to choose the spiritual path. Is that the only way someone finally chooses a spiritual path? No. It wasn't that way with you, really. Your consciousness and destiny chose it for you. And there are also other factors that can influence people to take the spiritual path. During the introspective times brought by suffering, people are more aware of that constant painful gnawing that exists from lack of inner peace. It reminds them, at least internally or subconsciously, about the great fact that the suffering caused by remaining separate and selfish will never end unless you return to oneness with the universal spirit. And that they can never really be happy as a selfish, separate self. Never. You may have temporary high points and get-offs, but that's it. And on the other hand, the pain of crucifying the selfish, separate self is just temporary. And when you're done, you have inner peace. And that's the only true happiness, and the only happiness that never leaves you. When people suffer enough pain, enough self-pain, they will eventually realize this. When one finally realizes this and thus decides to take the return trip, is when the real spiritual journey begins. This is the point when we each begin our real spiritual path. His words reminded me of all the different religion and spiritual paths I tried and studied before finding the one I was on now. Exactly what do you mean they're real spiritual path? Some are false? And why are there so many different spiritual paths and cultures? In search of the archetype. Oh, again with the multiple questions and so early in the morning. He was sounding like a rabbi, and he wasn't even Jewish. Well, I guess he was sort of Jewish in the broadest ancient sense, but also all the other religious rolled into one. Let me start with your last question first. There are as many specific paths back to the source of our being as there are individuals. It can be no other way. The entity is where they are, and basically what they are, because of the separate paths and experiences they have had and created in arriving at that point in time and space. Likewise, each entity has their own particular way to return or backtrack from that point. Let us use an allegory. Let us say there is a mountain of life. On all sides of this great mountain are paths, millions of paths. These paths have been created from people starting at the top, which is the point of oneness and of universal spirit. And all these paths are winding their way down the mountain, which is separateness and materiality in various ways. On each of these paths is a person. These people are at all kinds of different places on their path. Some are down at the base of the mountain, some are near the top, some don't care to climb the mountain, and some want to because they have realized they must get to the top to find oneness and peace. To get to the top, they each have a different route. The path they made themselves from the top. It doesn't really matter where each person's path is, they all still end up back at the top. As we get closer to the top, some paths converge. We converge with soulmates and with soul groups. I understand soulmates, but what are soul groups? Soul groups are other beings who are like our spiritual family. Those who were close to us in our previous state of existence or have grown closer to us for one reason or another. As we go higher, we need to grow closer with our soul groups, but particularly with our soul mates. Because at some point, right near the top, we need to merge and function again as one being with male and female elements, if present, rather than as separated and opposing male and females. Anyway, as we get very close to the top, we find that we and the others who are very close to the top are getting more alike. That's because there are archetypes, patterns for certain things that are the same at the higher consciousness levels. After all, the closer we get to becoming one, the more one we become. Thus, the more similar we become. While you probably have not seen this yet, you will. And you may have already experienced something similar. Have you ever noticed strangely strong similarities, physical or otherwise, between certain unrelated people? Yes, I have. I've also read about archetypes and seen certain examples of it. Little did I know at the time how much I would see. Most people don't get to actually experience this so directly and shockingly. but I have because of my path and my spiritual duties. During my first 3 years of traveling after leaving the monastery, I was in part working on bringing the people that were high on the allegorical mountain, yet still unaware of each other, closer together. The time was drawing near when more understanding of different beliefs, practices, and paths was becoming necessary. I witnessed entire spiritual communities whose members were identical or near identical, doubles, as if they all had multiple twins or clones or other people from other paths at similar levels of consciousness. These physical clones all had levels of consciousness that were virtually the same, yet they had different backgrounds, different types of spiritual development, and some what different beliefs. And this was no strange scientific experiment. It was simply a manifestation of our spiritual manifestation on earth. I even met a couple of doubles of Zayn, but one had black hair rather than silver. Judge for yourself only. Now, for your second to the last question about false paths, some people have concluded that their path is the right one, is the right way. Think that since their path is the right way for them, it must mean that it is the only right path, and that other paths are not the right way. They consider all other paths false or a lost way. But this may not be true. Let us use the mountain allegory again. Some people think that others must not be on a path at all, simply because they don't see others on their path and thus going up the mountain. They don't realize that others are climbing their own path on different parts of the mountain. So they make false judgments because they don't realize that they can't see the other people, simply because they cannot see them in front of their point of view. And they don't realize that just because they can't see the other people, it doesn't mean they aren't climbing the mountain on their own paths. Stepping out of our own mountain allegory for a moment and trying to explain it in another way. It's like this. Many people don't accept the paths of others because they can't understand it from their point of view. They don't realize that the other person's path may lead back to God also. Getting back to the mountain allegory again, the closer that people get to the top, which means the more expansive they get in consciousness, the greater their point of view. The top of the mountain has been become smaller, narrower, closer together, and thus it is easier to see more sides of the mountain at the same time and see the other person's path, and see the other's path that are also converging on the top. We too often see individuals of one particular path taking the attitude that their way is the way and all others are not on the path. This reflects their lower position on the mountain, their degree of lack of consciousness. So there isn't just one true spiritual path. Yes and no. How can I make it clearer? No particular path is the right path for everyone at a given place and time in their consciousness, even though it may be the path for the particular individuals who's on it. However, there comes a time when all must transcend their separations, their separate selves, to get to the top of the mountain where all are one. Those are the final steps of any true spiritual path. This is what we call the path of unselfish love. To get to the top, all must consciously climb the mountain step by step, no matter where you are starting from or where your particular path takes you. So we shouldn't judge others at all. With certain necessary exceptions, we really shouldn't judge others unless it is for the purpose of making choices or navigating on our own path, which in which case we must judge. For instance, you may have to judge whether or not someone you are thinking of hanging out with is bad or not because of the influence it may have on you. Otherwise, how are you to decide your own path? Or you may judge in order to learn from the mistakes of others instead of making them yourself. In a voting political society, people must judge the character of who they want to vote for in order to make the best choice for running a country. They may have to come to the conclusion that so and so is a bad person and shouldn't be running things. That is judging someone, isn't it? Yes. And is that wrong? No, of course not. There are many such judgments you must make in life, but most people don't just judge, they condemn. And there is a big difference between judging and condemning. Condemning is judging without unselfish love. It is a judgment tinged with resentment, hostility, hatred, or anger, and is damaging to both the person who is condemning and the person who is being condemned. Judging alone is sufficient to allow you to make a positive action. You don't need to be condemning of someone because they are doing something bad. And some things may not be bad, but just things that are not right for you. You have to discriminate that too. But there will be times when you need to judge that something is bad so that you do not do the same. Many things are necessary. On many paths, people must tread to learn their lessons or pay back their karma. And it is not for us to condemn. It is also not for us to interfere unless it hurts us or others. So when you decide you like someone or dislike someone, are you judging them or condemning them? It can be either. Most people place those they meet or know into one of those two categories: people they like and people they don't like. This is pretty much the same as dividing people up into categories of good and bad. But for those situations in which you do not need to discern your own path by judging someone and deciding the ramifications of associating with them, there is another way they should be looked at. Rather than focusing on a person's so-called good qualities or bad qualities, liking or disliking them, one should see the whole being. Author's note: like with the car we described in an earlier chapter that had one good side and one damaged side. In order to serve the universal spirit and help our kin, one should not disregard the other aspects of a person's nature and focus just on the good or bad. There is something else to consider also that may mislead you in judging a person's character if you are not seeing from a higher perspective. If you are seeing people with limited perception, you may see someone during a time and day in which they are strongly exhibiting their good nature or bad nature. Someone else may have seen that same person during a time and day in which They were strongly exhibiting the opposite of the nature you perceived. Thus, people often can seem like a good or bad person, just depending on your point of view or a time of view. Again, seeing both sides is the only way of truly knowing the real person. And we should have unlimited love for everyone without exception, just as the sun rises on all without exception, all the time, in all directions. Now, if you are a true teacher dealing with a student who has asked for your criticism, though, you have a job to do, and you must look for it and point out faults in the student's character at all times, and not allow for moods. But that is your duty in such a situation. That is what they have asked you to do for them so they can improve and grow towards the light in our everlasting pursuit of perfection. But you should also point out their potential. So the path can be painful and humiliating for the student. What do you think? I smiled. Obviously. What a stupid thing to say. You have to yet you have yet to face your greatest trials. I heard that before. It scared the yak dung out of me. I'm not afraid. Bring them on. Sure. He looked at me with that look again. Okay, I'm going to stop there at the half-hour point so it'll be easier to upload. And we are stopping on page 175 at the point of climbing to our crucifixion. So that's where we will start at next. Okay. Thank you for taking the time to listen to The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. We are in chapter 12. This was part 1. And share this with others. Re-listen to the videos. Whatever, I am grateful that you have taken the time for listening to it now. Okay? Because it is for the betterment of us all. So until next time.